Hey everyone, this is a first generation Mazda 6 and the video is going to show you how to replace the front control arms. For all the Ford Fusion owners that are watching this video, don't leave just yet. The Mazda 6 and the Ford Fusion first generations share the same chassis, so everything in this video applies to the Ford Fusion. Just a little overview about this car. It has 3 control arms per side. We have 1 upper and 2 lower control arms. So one of the lower control arms, the bolt has very little room to slide out, so the rear of the subframe will have to be dropped a couple inches. Here's the shot of the second lower control arm. So that's it for the tour. I'm going to go ahead and get started and lift the knuckle assembly up a little bit just so that it's easier to remove the ball joint and the upper control arm. You can see here that I got my trusty socket set. The first thing I'm going to do is remove that nut on the ball joint. It's a 17mm in size, and I'm not going to be using any fancy power tools, just a good old wrench and then a pipe to give it some more torque. Once that's out of the way, I'm going to give the knuckle and the ball joint a couple of good whacks with the hammer so that the two separate from each other. And I'm going to be using a 4-pound sledgehammer. You definitely want at least a 4-pounder for this job, and if you have a 10-pounder, that's even better. Now that I have those two separated, I can move on to the 2 bolts that hold the control arm in place. They are 15mm bolts, and I'm just going to be using a wrench to get in there. As you can see, there's no room to remove that left bolt, so I'm going to be using my jack to compress the spring a little bit so that I can get some room in there. That's all there is to it. Once you have those 2 bolts taken out, just slide the control arm out. Just a small note about the upper control arms. The left and right side are different, so be sure you order the right side. As you can see, I found out the hard way here that I ordered the wrong one. Once you have the new control arm in place, go ahead and install the bolts, but do not tighten them all the way just yet. The reason for that is anytime that bushings are involved, you want to make sure that the suspension is first preloaded before you tighten them up. And I will go over that towards the end of the video. So that's it for the easy part. We're now going to move on to the lower control arms. Go ahead and loosen up the 23mm nuts on both of the ball joints, but don't take them out all the way. So now we're going to try separating the ball joints from the knuckle. And first of all, I'm going to show you the wrong way to do it, and after that I'll show you the right way. Okay, wrong way number 1, and that is using a aluminum pickle fork and using it upside down. And for wrong way number 2, we have a gear puller. Yeah, most of these don't work and you'll end up doing this. So now I'm going to show you how to do it the right way. The first is to get a nice pickle fork set. And it's also a good idea to spread some oil or grease on the surface of the pickle fork just so that it slides easier. And when you're ready, go ahead and slide the fork in and start beating the crap out of it. Again, I'm going to be using my 4-pound sledgehammer, but if you want to use something bigger, that's entirely up to you. Alright, so that's 1 down and 1 to go. Before we can separate the second one, we have to remove this bolt that holds the strut to the control arm. I'm going to be holding one end of the bolt and removing the nut from the other side. Great, so now that's out of the way, we can continue with separating the second ball joint. Do the same thing as you did the first time around and beat the crap out of that thing. So that was it for the hard part. We're now going to move on to lowering the rear of the subframe. But before we can do that, we have to disconnect the steering shaft. Under the driver's side dashboard, there is a plastic cover that's held on by two plastic retainers. With those out of the way, you can now take the cover off. And underneath, there is the U-joint that's secured with a 12mm bolt. I had the steering wheel turned all the way to the right, so here you can see me straightening it back out. And before you take out the thing, it's probably a good idea to mark it just so you know which way it goes back in when you reinstall it. When that bolt is out of the way, you can lift up the steering shaft and set it aside. And finally, we have to remove this round rubber seal. You can get to it from the other side of the car and just lift it up. It's secured with a couple of clips on the other side. At this point, you want to grab a jack and support the rear of the subframe as you remove all of the bolts. The subframe is secured with a couple of heavy-duty brackets. Now that both brackets are out of the way, you can begin to lower the rear of the subframe. You don't need to go too much, just a couple of inches at the most, and you should be fine. As you can see here, I'm now able to remove that bolt from the control arm, and then I can slide the control arm out. And again, just like the upper control arm, you don't want to tighten that bolt too much. The subframe can now be lifted back up and the brackets can be reinstalled. Also, don't forget to reconnect your steering shaft. We're going to move on to the final control arm. Go ahead and remove that bolt and slide the control arm out. I have my replacement control arm ready to go. The final part of this job is to preload the suspension and tighten up all of the bolts. I'm going to use my jack to compress the suspension just enough to leave 15.83 inches between the center of the wheel hub and the top of the fender. So the suspension is now preloaded. We can go ahead and begin tightening everything down. That's it, you're done. I hope you found this video helpful. As always, don't forget to subscribe and check out this channel. I have more Mazda videos for you. I will see you next time.